All right, so in this video, we're going to cover the data collection and interpreting of that data from all TraffiCalm IQ series signs. So this excludes value series. They don't collect data or traffic data, whereas the IQ series signs do. So we're going to show you how to get into it, retrieve that data from the sign when you're on site, and then how to view and interpret that data further down the line. So the first thing we want to do is connect to the sign we're at. So assuming you're roadside next to the sign you installed, if it's a portable sign, perhaps it's sitting at your desk charging. In either case, we're going to be connecting to the system via Bluetooth. So on a Windows machine, by the way, our system is only compatible with Windows PCs, including laptops, or Android phones or tablets. We don't have anything available for Apple at this point to connect to these signs, so you'll have to have one of those two devices to connect to it. So what we're going to do is launch our Start menu, go to Settings. This is on Windows 10 or 11, the same process on both. Search for Bluetooth here in the Settings. And that'll pull up your Bluetooth management. Now, your device does have to have Bluetooth built in, but you could potentially buy a Bluetooth USB dongle to accomplish the same thing. So you may have that. The process here is the same. You plug in your Bluetooth dongle or you use your Bluetooth built-in device to search for and add the radar speed sign that you're trying to connect to. So first thing we want to do is click the Add Bluetooth or other device here in the upper corner. Select that it's a Bluetooth type. And we're going to now, the computer is going to search for available devices. I happen to know this is the device I'm looking for because it is the matched serial number to the display module. This is an IQ 1500 sign. So the serial number for that matches this is actually on the display module itself. The reason for that is so that you can switch display modules among structures out there in the field. So this number carries with the display module because that's where the Bluetooth module is built into. So I'm just going to go ahead and try to pair to that. It's going to tell me it's connecting. It's going to ask me for a pin, which is always 1, 2, 3, 4. Select to connect to that. And now it's good to go. So Windows has created a pair to that device. You'll notice it's now here in my list of available devices. I'm going to now launch TraffiCalm. TraffiCalm is available on our website. It is designated by this little speed sign icon, and it's called TraffiCalm Configuration Software. In this instance, I'm going to connect by Bluetooth. You could work offline if you didn't have a device to connect to, and we'll use that later. Or you could connect directly by RS-232 or serial connection. In this case, we're connecting by Bluetooth. The software is going to launch into its home screen and show a list of available devices that I can connect to. Take a second to pull up there. There's this device that I just already paired to. I select it, click OK. Now it's going to ask me for some credentials. These are always defaulted to user 3. And then you turn your caps lock on. It'll warn you that it's on. The password is 04admin04. If you have any questions about that, you can go to the help document. You can select to work offline in the software. Go to help. Go to the TraffiCalm help folder, and one of the first few paragraphs is the published passwords here. But again, user 3, password is 04admin04 with admin portion all capitalized. Select log on. You'll notice that it gives you some messages about having connected. And the general sign information will populate with real data here. If any of these say offline or they are blank, then you have not successfully connected that sign. But in this case, it's all populated, so it is ready to connect. So the first thing we want to do, if we have never set up the sign to be used for data collection before, by default, most of the sensitivity settings of the sign or the data range settings of the sign are not going to be good enough for collecting data off the roadway. We need to do some further refinement here in the system to make sure that it gives the best possible measure of data out there. So the first thing we want to do is go up to Edit and select Display Setup and set the clock of the device. The clock will drift slightly every year. It's got a real-time clock built into the device, and that holds the time for as best it can, but it will drift about a minute or so a year. If any power down event happens, the sign will reset to 1970. So after like 4 days. So in this case, I've told it to set it to the date and time of my laptop. I've clicked the set clock button and got the response OK. If I exit out of that now, I notice that it is appropriately set to Tuesday, December 20th at 9:31, the same time as my system time. From here, we need to set up or refine the configuration of the sign. So if you're running multiple configurations, you'll notice I've got 4 on this system. I'm going to have to go in and change each one of those to make sure it's operating correctly. To do so, the best possible way, I'm going to click on each one. So I'm on configuration 1 right now. I will click edit display down here with 1 selected. I'm going to change 3 values. One's going to be the log min, and the second one's going to be the log max, and the third one's going to be the squelch. The log min. Now, granted, these the min speed, speed limit, excess speed, and max speed. These are the settings for what affect the display natures of the sign. The data collection or the speed data will reflect off of the set speed limit, so that's important to remember. But the log min and log max dictate how wide of a detail in the information set we want to look at. So this one's set to 30 to 65 miles per hour with a middle point of 45 miles per hour at the speed limit. That seems pretty decent, but I could set this down to say 20 if I wanted to see more slow speed data, or I could set it up to higher like 80 or 90 if I wanted to see more high speed data, depending on the roadway it's on, right? So these are really contingent on where you're putting the sign up at. Usually 15 above and below the speed limit are where you want to land. So I'm going to set this to 30 and 60. That's going to give me a good division of data, because we'll see later this dictates how the data is broken up into speed bins. We don't just show raw data like this car went by at this time at 43 miles an hour. We show that in a 15-minute interval, 65 cars went by at a range of, say, 35 to 42. We don't know in that speed range or in that time frame specific data about individual cars, but for averages and for traffic counting and for law enforcement purposes, binning that data really provides quick access to information. We'll go through that in a minute. The last setting we want to set up, though, is the squelch setting. By default, it's set to 100, so we don't miss a single vehicle. The problem with that is that it could also pick up leaves blowing or fans spinning, or even like neon lights if those are still utilized in like pub windows or whatever. So 100 is a very low value. The higher the value we set it to, the less sensitive the radar is. For all of our IQ signs, 200 is a much better refinement. You're still going to capture small vehicles, including motorcycles. For the most part, you might miss a few motorcycles or cyclists here and there. We will definitely pick up like small compact cars at 200. Anything above 200, 300, 400, you can set it to a value of 1 if you wanted to, like 201. But anything above like 200 is going to start to exclude those small vehicle cars. We don't want to do that. So I click the update display button. That's going to send those settings to the sign to its temporary memory. If I wanted to, if I made a mistake, I could click undo changes. I did not make a mistake, so I actually want to save the configuration. This step is really critical. If the sign powers down for any reason, it's going to revert to the previous settings that it had set. I'm going to click save configuration. And now that is actually sent to the sign and saved as the default settings for 1. If I wanted to, if I needed to, I could go through for 2 and 4 and do the same thing. I don't need to in this case. I'm just going to stick with the 1. The 1 is the primary configuration I run on the sign. So with the solid sign all set up, we would give it a week, 30 days, 90 days to collect data at this point. It's going to be really clean data with the display time set. Unfortunately, everything collected previous to this is going to be incorrect, right? The date was set incorrectly. The speed settings were set incorrectly. So I would do a nice clean sweep right now and start fresh. To do that, we go to the tools menu and maintenance, and then we select to clear logs. Once I click send on that, it's going to clear everything off of the system and start completely fresh. Highly recommended that you do this, even to the effect of every time you go retrieve logs from the sign. Once you've successfully done so, go ahead and clear the logs from it. It's going to keep those logs really clean and short, and it won't take very long to load them once you do this process. If you keep just a running tally of logs, it's going to overwrite the oldest data with new data to the tune of around 9 months worth of data is usually what we see for most customers. Really depends on how much traffic volume there is, but generally speaking, 9 months to a year's worth of data can be stored in the sign. That can take a very long time to download over Bluetooth, though. So we really recommend every time you go out there, either select a specific date range that you know you should select, or after successfully downloading, select to clear the logs if it's something you're going to be doing on an ongoing basis. There is another refinement here that we can select from the maintenance menu. That's going to be to set the radar baseline. So once I set this, the sign's going to evaluate the environment in front of it and see if there's anything that it can weed out. If a vehicle approaches the sign during the time that it's trying to do this, it's actually going to stop the process and not allow it to occur. So right now I've got this sign pointed at the wall of my office, so it has excluded everything, including reflective materials like the desk it's pointed at or the window that it has across the way from it. All these values here are going to now be excluded from its collection. So What this has done is it has said, let's say there is in fact like a fan blowing or some sort of reflective surface where cars could be appearing to be approaching the sign off of. It's going to exclude those sources of what we would call bad data or false positives, and really refine the collection of the data down to real vehicles driving at the sign sequentially. I'm done here. I'm going to exit out of this, and now we can go and I'll show you how to retrieve the logs from the sign. So again, I've cleared logs on this sign, or I should have cleared logs on this sign. I didn't. I kept it there so that I can go retrieve what is stored into it. So if I go up to View, there's four options: event log, speed log, status, and log file. What we're really after here is the speed log. The event log is a log of like the sign's parameters, such as like power status or charging status or like temperature. The speed log is where we actually retrieve the speed data that the sign has recorded for every driver. Status shows like a report of what the sign's currently experiencing. And then if we click this log file button, that allows us to go back and view a speed log that we've previously saved. So in this case, I'm going to click speed log to retrieve the sign data. I'm going to select a specific date range here. Let's select 30 days of information. So I'm going to go September 1st to October 1st, I guess 31 days from 2021. This is when the sign was, I assume, actually out on the roadway. I'm going to click OK. And you'll notice that this can take a moment to progress through. We'll fast forward it in the video here just so we're not actually waiting real time for this thing to download. But know that it could take up to 5 minutes for a data set to download. All right, so with your data log downloaded, you're going to be confronted with a screen that shows just the raw data that's been collected by the sign. This is actually a visualization of the CSV format that is produced by the sign, and that could be opened in Excel and manipulated there. But we also provide a full reporting suite here within the software that makes it easy for non-technical users to evaluate their speed data. The first thing we want to do once we get the log downloaded is to click the Save Log button. So in this instance, I have a file on my desktop called Sign Eastbound. So let's navigate to it here. Sign Eastbound Main Street data logs. And then I've got my today's logs here, and I can store this log, and you'll notice that it has a name assigned to this data log that is reflective of the sign's parameters. So SP denotes speed. This is the sign or the display module's serial number. This is the name that we've assigned to the display module, and then today's date. Knowing now that this speed log was saved today, and it was for this specific sign. And you can manipulate this name if you want to, and you could add the timestamp as well, right? 94800 or something like that, 094800. There we go. Save that out, and now that is saved permanently on my desktop or in this file on my desktop up here. That allows me to go and retrieve that log or view that log information without actually having to go out to the site. It now creates a history of the collected data from that site. So as I build out that file, I can create years and years and years worth of information from that specific site that can be concatenated into a specific file and visualize a whole range of data for years and years, right? Again, that would be on the Excel side, not so much in our software. Our software is only going to look at the downloaded data set. So let's go ahead and click the one thing to note is that this print log button allows you to select Adobe PDF as your print destination. So any view you see within the speed logs, you could print a PDF and share with your coworkers. They don't have to be technical users on TraffiCalm. They don't have to have access to the signs or access to the software. You can distribute this information by printing it to a PDF. To view the actual reports, though, we need to click the Show Chart button. The first screen you're going to be confronted with is a refinement screen. So you can take the data set you've downloaded. So this one was downloaded on from 7/2/2013 to 8/21/2013. So about a month and a half there, right? You could drive this and say, I only want to look at the month of July. So I started on the 2nd, and I want to see until the 31st. There. So now I've got about 30 days worth of data that I'm looking at. Additionally, the speed limit and speed range settings are very important to understand. As you make changes to the sign's configurations, namely to the speed limit and the high or the speed min and speed max settings, like we did before, these values will split the data set into two groups. This sign specifically only ever had one speed limit set at 15. this is a data set from a field, or assigned from the field. So it was set to a speed limit of 15 miles per hour for this whole date range. And the speed range was only ever set to 5 to 30. As you manipulate these, you'll be given different selections. That will effectively split your speed logs into multiple groups. So you won't, if you're looking at the 15 mile an hour data set, you won't see information collected when the speed limit was set to 45. That's just not going to happen. So you have to select which one you're trying to look for. Here it's simple. We only have one. For most customers, most users, that's going to be the case. For like school zones where the speed limit changes throughout the day, you may have 2 or 3 selections here to select from. All right, you'll notice that this chart below shows the ebb and flow of traffic throughout time of day. It's very compact, right? It's just to show you like this is the amount of data that you're going to be looking at in this time range. If I drill down on simply just a day's worth of data, now you see it's a much more visible graph. Let's go with a week's worth of data, and that should give us a good visualization of what happens through an average week in July in front of this sign, right? So to do so, I'm going to click the plots button, and that takes us to our 6 reports. To understand these reports, the first thing we have to understand is that the sign itself is going to collect 2 data points for every driver or every vehicle. It's going to collect the highest speed of that vehicle and the lowest speed of that vehicle. So if somebody comes in this 15 mile an hour speed zone at 25 miles an hour, it's going to record that 25 mile an hour speed hit. If they slow down to 14, it's going to record that 14 mile an hour speed hit. So that consolidates all this information together and produces a kind of a visualization of what's going on the roadway there. So this highest speed summary report, you'll notice there's a highest speed summary report, and there's also a lowest speed summary report. Now they look very, very similar, except they're doing 2 different things. The highest speed summary report is considering all the data for drivers at their highest speeds, again, that high data collected point, and the lowest does it for every driver at their lowest speed, or every vehicle at its lowest speed. So looking at the highest speed summary report, there's a couple data points here that we should delineate. So the first thing is going to be across the top here, you've got a lot of fields that show basically what happened when I collected this data. The reporting period, the measurement period, the title of the sign, the posted speed limit of 15, and how many entries or lines of data were collected. So starting at the top, on 7/2 at 4:43 in the afternoon, the percent of drivers above the speed limit during that time interval were 68% of drivers. 2 drivers were going between 7 and 8 miles per hour. 0 drivers were going under 7 miles per hour. 1 driver was going between 9 to 10, so on and so forth, up to, we see that 3 drivers were going above 23 miles an hour, so grossly above the speed limit. And above the speed limit, you got 1, 6, and 9 drivers. Again, 68% of drivers were going above that set speed limit of 15 miles an hour. 10. And in that time period, a total of 16 vehicles were counted. So you can look across each line item and see that we're tallying vehicles for a 15-minute interval. Here's the trick. If I go to the same time interval and look at the same total vehicles for lowest speed summary report, it is again 16. The total counts for all drivers going these speeds in that whole time interval should change. However, the total number of vehicles down here, 2,674 vehicles went by this sign in the 1 week period. That's going to remain constant at lowest and highest speed graphs. So you can always compare those 2 values to make sure that you are talking about the same vehicles. It should be the same. There's no way for it to be different, but that's just reassuring that the counts that are seen here tallied at 2,674 and the same for the lowest. What we should see is a reduction in average speed. So here, drivers at their highest, on the highest speed summary report, they were going an average 22 miles an hour. On the lowest speed summary report, they were going 19 miles an hour. So an overall reduction of 3 miles per hour was experienced on average. Now, that is to say that this is a 15 mile an hour speed zone. So on average, most drivers stayed above the speed limit, but at a much more reasonable pace, right? We can also look at things like 25th percentile. So 25% of drivers were doing 15 miles an hour or less. 50% of drivers were doing 26 miles an hour or less. And 85% of drivers were doing 28 miles an hour or less. This is a magic number that says most drivers, 85% of drivers, are going to be doing a safe speed. So 15 mile an hour speed limit is probably severely low for this roadway. There's other factors to consider, but that is a very usable metric. All these values should be lower on the lowest speed. So they did reduce, the average being the most applicable number. So you could go through line item by line item here, but really it's to look at an average. One thing we do is show a distribution of speeds. Now this chart does two things that can't really be correlated, but it shows a bar graph of drivers at their highest and drivers at their lowest speeds and how it kind of plays out across the bins, right? So this is a very short form graph that shows most drivers, even at their highest and lowest, were still going in the upper speed bin, above 23 miles an hour. So the distribution of vehicles down here, the volume is much lower in the lower bins. So everybody's still wanting to go, even at their lowest speed, this blue bar at the very far right here, they're still wanting to go well above the speed limit. After they've seen the sign, it's told them to slow down, they're intentionally going above the speed limit. So we've talked about highest speed summary report. We talked about lowest speed summary report, again, accomplishing the same thing, so except showing two different data sets. We've talked about the speed distribution, showing how these two data sets kind of correlate. So what we should see, actually, there is a way to correlate these two. The blue graphs should be higher in the low bins or showing a reduction in overall speed. So in each, comparing each speed bin, like this one, at drivers at their highest, capped out 45% of the volume, we're going above 23% on average, or in total, I'm sorry. Whereas at their lowest speeds, less than 25% drivers were going in this speed bin. The other 20% of drivers distributed amongst the lower speed bins. They didn't go up because there's nowhere to go up to. They actually went lower. Speeding vehicles chart. Now you'll notice this is highly populated for a large date range, even as short as a week right here. So there's not much we can visualize. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit out, go back to my plots, and look at just 24 hours worth of data. There. So now I've got from 7.2 to 7.3 is the reporting period. Of course, the measurement period was larger, but I'm only looking at 7.2 to 7.3. Back to the speeding vehicles chart. Now you can see through that 24-hour time period, the percent of vehicles, 100 to 0%, given any time period on the x-axis down here, the percent of drivers that were going over the speed limit. So you'll notice here in the midnight to 4 a.m. range, not a lot of drivers were going over the speed limit. However, on that day, between like 4:40 and, what is this? 1 or 2 o'clock, almost all the drivers were going above the speed limit. Again, this is a kind of an unusual circumstance because the speed limit was so low, and obviously the speed limit should have been set higher, or drivers should have been allowed to go a little faster. So they were going the appropriate speed. But if you were to look at this chart, you would see that most drivers during the portion of the day were going above the speed limit. We can also look at the volume, so the count of drivers. So this is only 0 to 12 because there was such a low volume of drivers. In a normal municipal roadway, you're going to see a much higher volume count, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of drivers, and showing what percentage of those go above the speed limit as well. So in this case, looking at this time slot right here from 6:13 to 6:58, that point there that kind of levels out at the top of the chart, 100% of drivers, all 12 of them were going over the speed limit in this time period. Likewise, the average speed of all vehicles. So looking at what is the speed of vehicles by time of day at drivers at their highest and drivers at their lowest. So the red line is what we're going to focus on mainly throughout the day, throughout that 24 time period, when were drivers going their fastest. We can see again toward the evening when people are coming home from work is when they're going their fastest. The culmination of all of these two charts, especially speeding and average speed, when would you put a law enforcement officer out there to most effectively issue citations, to be honest? So this time period here, the 1643 to 2113 would be a very effective time frame to put a law enforcement officer out there to issue citations. Whereas this time of day here, early morning, might not be so good for this sign. Again, that might flip for whatever sign you're looking at, and that's what the whole speed report's looking at or intends to do. Finally, the 85th percentile shows by time of day what was the 85th percentile speed for all drivers. So 85% of drivers were going 24 miles an hour or less. Just to reiterate, we looked at the highest and lowest speed summary reports. The speed distribution shows those in a bar graph format. The speeding vehicles, average speed, and 85th percentile charts just show breakdowns of the data sets so that you can determine by time of day what drivers are doing, or kind of get a scope of what's going on the roadway without having to actually be there. I'll exit out of this. Back at the main screen, I'll just jump back to a week's worth of data again to show you those various charts. Speeding vehicles, you'll see, is a little bit ascertainable, but very, very populated for the window that it's in. Average speed is going to be a very similar chart. However, you see more of a trend here. Once you're done, you can just close out of the software. And I'll show you how to reopen the software. So you're at the sign up until this point. Essentially, we were at the sign roadside. That's not reasonable for most circumstances. You've got your data loaded already. So what you do when you get back to your office, click TraffiCalm, select Work Offline, go to View and Log File, and then navigate to that file that you store those in. So sign eastbound Main Street data logs is where I stored it at under the today's date. And then I loaded it right there, and I can open that. Again, just open up the raw data. I can click the Show Chart. That opens up the refinement window, and then select Plots to get into the actual data set. That really is all there is to data collection. There's one more aspect, which we'll cover in another video, and that's how to manipulate this data in CSV format so that you can use the raw data for your own charts and graphs purposes.